The Empire Sky Club sat 80 floors above Fifth Avenue, a glass and steel cathedral of privilege that loomed like a throne above Manhattan. Its panoramic windows spilled open onto the city's restless nightscape, bridges lit like jeweled necklaces, towers gleaming like sentinels, yellow taxis crawling like veins of light through the grid below. Inside, the air itself seemed to shimmer with money. The club was a rarefied sanctuary for the elite hedge fund titans, sipping 40-year-old Scotch senators whispering to tech magnates about campaign donations, real estate moguls trading gossip that could shift property values in 3 boroughs. The chandelier's custom Murano glass did not just illuminate, they announced. Every detail was calculated to remind the room's inhabitants that they were the chosen, the unchallenged stewards of American power. And then into this sanctum walked Naomi Carter. She did not glide in on a wave of laughter or entourage. She arrived quietly, as though she had simply decided she belonged there, and because of that she did. Her dress was a deep midnight navy cut, sharp and precise, a design that whispered competence rather than flaunted wealth. No sequins, no glittering jewelry, just elegance distilled to its essence. At her feet rested a minimalist carry-on black leather scuffed slightly at the corners. In her hand a phone glowed faintly, its screen alive with unread messages. Most women in that room dripped diamonds like an armor. Naomi wore none. Most men shook hands too firmly, announced their alma maters too loudly. Naomi smiled at no one. The silence she carried with her was the kind that unsettled those who needed attention to feel real. 2 security personnel in tailored black suits stood near her, not to watch her, but to wait for her signal. A subtle distinction, but one that would later matter. It was Brandon Whitmore Jr. who lit the match. He had inherited everything but humility. The son of Alistair Whitmore, the man who controlled towers, highways, and whole swaths of Manhattan real estate. Brandon thrived on mockery the way some men thrived on wine. He saw Naomi standing alone near the main observation deck, her posture unshakable, her eyes fixed not on the room, but on the city lights below. It irritated him. Here was a woman who wasn't bending toward the spotlight, wasn't vying for proximity to him or his circle. And that would not do. "Who the hell let you in this room?" Brandon's voice cracked across the club like a whip. "You look like you got lost on your way to the kitchen." The words weren't whispered. They weren't private. They were designed to detonate in public, to humiliate. And they did. Heads turned, glasses stilled halfway to lips. A ripple of nervous laughter drifted like static across the polished marble floor. For Brandon, cruelty was performance art. He thrived on audiences, and tonight the entire Empire Sky Club was his theater. In such rooms, silence has its own gravity. It dragged everyone's attention toward the confrontation. Naomi did not flinch. Her dark eyes, steady, intelligent, did not dart for allies. Her back remained straight, her breathing slow. To some, her stillness read as weakness. To others, it was unnerving. Brandon, mistaking the crowd's shock for admiration, pressed on. "Oh, come on, I can't be the only one thinking it. She's not a donor, she's not a keynote, so..." "Which one of you brought the diversity hire as your +1?" A titter of laughter, thin, cowardly, escaped a cluster of men by the bar. A woman in a diamond-drenched gown smirked politely, the kind of smirk that says, "I don't approve, but I also won't risk my seat at the table by disagreeing." The Empire Sky Club had rules. Rule 1: power protects power, even when it embarrasses itself. Yet Naomi stood there silent. Not the silence of shame. Not the silence of fear. This was something heavier, denser, the silence of a storm cloud moments before it breaks, the silence of a chess master waiting for the opponent to take the bait. She tapped her phone screen once, twice, each tap deliberate. Then stillness. The tap was not defiance. It was countdown. But no one in the room knew that yet. Naomi's gaze swept briefly across the ballroom, senators in $1,000 suits, media executives laughing too loudly, young heiresses draped in couture. Every glance catalogued, every smirk filed away. To them, she was invisible, an anomaly, an interloper. But to Naomi, they were pawns. 15 years earlier, she had walked into a Silicon Valley boardroom, the only black woman in a sea of white men in Patagonia vests. She had pitched a revolutionary data compression model. They had smiled patronizingly, told her she was articulate and inspiration. She left that day with no funding. But she also left with a vow. She would never again beg to be seen. What no one in this ballroom knew, what Brandon Whitmore certainly didn't know, was that Naomi Carter wasn't just a guest. She was the reason this event existed at all. In 2008, when the housing crash gutted Whitmore Realty and bankruptcy loomed, Naomi's fledgling Nexus Capital Partners had quietly wired $4.2 billion into their survival fund. She had remained invisible on the paperwork, a silent, non-voting partner. Silent, but holding the master key to everything. Tonight's glittering gala paid for by her liquidity. This skyscraper's R&D wing underwritten by her signature. Even the logo embossed on the champagne napkins approved by her. And yet, they mocked. Brandon stepped closer, enjoying his role. Don't just stand there like a lost puppy, sweetheart. What's your name? Who are you with? Naomi's lips curved not into a smile but into something far more dangerous: composure. Behind her, the glass towers of Manhattan glittered like witnesses. From across the room, Richard Hale, senior advisor to the Whitmore empire, squinted. He had seen Naomi's name before on a Singapore logistics term sheet. A biotech IPO, something gnawed at the edge of recognition. But Brandon wasn't interested in recognition. He wanted entertainment. You know what? Brandon spread his arms, voice rising. She's probably some brand ambassador. Pitching us skincare? Or a wellness app? Am I right, honey? This time the laughter was louder, slicing into Naomi like 1,000 paper cuts. Still, she didn't move. On the far side of the room, a junior analyst named Maya Lopez, only 23 and clutching her client folders like armor, watched with growing unease. Something about Naomi's calm unsettled her. It wasn't defiance, it was certainty. On instinct, Maya glanced down at her encrypted tablet scrolling through tonight's event briefing. She froze. Under the header, Primary Partners Phoenix Whitmore Joint Venture, a name glared back at her. Naomi Carter, Managing Director. Nexus Capital Partners. Her pulse quickened. She looked up again at the woman standing silently against Brandon's jeers. And suddenly she understood. This wasn't a guest. This wasn't an outsider. This was the architect. Back at the bar, Brandon raised his champagne glass, high, smug grin plastered across his face. Let's all drink to inclusivity, shall we? Our new plus one seems to think she belongs. The laughter was crueler now, sharper, a chorus of complicity. Naomi's phone buzzed in her hand. A single encrypted message from Elias Morgan, her operations chief, appeared. FYI, Omega Protocol is primed. One word from you. Naomi looked up slowly, her gaze sweeping the room with a patience that chilled. Then for the first time all night she spoke, her voice low, resonant, carrying without effort. Tell me, she said, her eyes locked on Brandon, is there a dress code here I've misunderstood? Or just a face code? The silence that followed was seismic, and it was only the beginning. The words landed with surgical precision. Is there a dress code here I've misunderstood? Or just a face code? The air inside the Empire Sky Club thickened. It was no longer laughter that circled the room, but something sharper, unease. A current of discomfort rippled across the marble floor, through the glittering gowns and bespoke suits, through every guest who had been trained since birth to recognize when a line had been crossed. Brandon Whitmore Jr. blinked, momentarily stunned. He had expected stammering. He had expected the flush of embarrassment. Instead, Naomi Carter had given him a blade disguised as a question. And worse, she had delivered it calmly. For a fraction of a second, Brandon faltered. But weakness was something he could never afford to show, not here, not in front of the empire his last name was supposed to command. He laughed, too loudly. Oh, I see. She's got a sense of humor. Well, sweetheart, that's cute. But this isn't open mic night. This is a closed event. And he gestured toward her with his champagne glass liquid, sloshing dangerously close to the rim or out of your depth. The crowd chuckled, brittle and uncertain. Their laughter was not loyalty. It was insurance, the reflexive instinct of those who knew that even a cruel man's power was still power, and aligning with it was safer than opposing it. Richard Hale stood a few paces behind Brandon, his posture immaculate, his tailored suit precise to the millimeter. To the untrained eye, he was merely the loyal consigliere, a shadow that reinforced his employer's authority. But Richard's mind was racing. The name Carter gnawed at him. He had seen it before, buried in board minutes hidden in the footnotes of international contracts, and yet Brandon treated her as though she were a trespasser. Richard's gaze flicked to the phone in Naomi's hand. Her thumb rested with unsettling composure over the screen, as if one tap could change the trajectory of the evening. Perhaps it could. Naomi did not dignify Brandon's jab with an answer. Instead, she turned her head slightly, her eyes catching the city skyline beyond the glass. To most, it looked like indifference. To those who looked closer, it was calculation. Her silence was not surrender, it was leverage. In a room filled with voices desperate to dominate, silence could be the loudest sound. On the far edge of the ballroom, Maya Lopez's fingers trembled as she scrolled through her encrypted tablet. The young analyst could hardly breathe. There it was, glowing in official font stamped with the seal of Whitmore Realty Nexus Capital Partners. Lead financier, Representative Naomi Carter, Managing Director. Her chest tightened. She looked up at Naomi, this woman standing alone, poised, unyielding, and saw her not as an intruder, but as the invisible hand holding up the very foundation of the Whitmore Empire. The realization was terrifying. Maya wanted to shout it out to correct the narrative unfolding in front of her, but her voice was a fragile thing in this cathedral of money, and Brandon's sneer was the kind that had crushed stronger people than her. Still, the truth burned in her throat, demanding release. From the bar, a venture capitalist in his 50s leaned toward his companion. "She's bold, I'll give her that." "But Brandon will crush her." His friend smirked. "Of course he will. Do you see what she's wearing? That's not armor. That's ordinary." Their words dripped with the lazy arrogance of men who had never been underestimated in their lives. Naomi heard them. She filed them away. "Tell you what," Brandon said, setting his glass down with a flourish. "Since you've interrupted our evening, why don't you introduce yourself? Let's see if we can all guess which nonprofit sent you to tug on our heartstrings. Or maybe you're writing a screenplay about the rich and powerful. This could be great research." The laughter was sharper this time, the edges of cruelty more pronounced. Naomi's eyes shifted slowly to Brandon, and for the first time the faintest curve of a smile touched her lips. Not warmth, not amusement. Something colder. It was the kind of smile that belongs to a chess master who knows the game has already been won, even if the opponent hasn't realized it yet. Richard Hale felt it. The room was laughing, yes, but the laughter no longer rang true. It was brittle, defensive. Too many were looking at their phones now, too many were whispering, too many were searching for context. He adjusted his cufflinks, his mind racing back through contracts, through the names that had crossed his desk. Carter. Nexus. Something about this was profoundly wrong. In that moment, Naomi remembered another ballroom 15 years ago in Palo Alto. She had stood in front of men who praised her intelligence while simultaneously denying her capital. They had laughed then too, smiled warmly while explaining why she was not the right fit. But she had walked out of that room with fire in her veins, with a vow etched into her bones: the next time I stand in a room like this, I will not be asking for a seat at the table. I will own the table. Tonight she was delivering on that vow. Maya's heart hammered in her chest. She could not stay silent. Taking a tentative step forward, she clutched her tablet tighter, the glow of Naomi's name still burning on the screen. She opened her mouth and froze, because Brandon's voice thundered again, louder than before. You know what I think, Brandon said, pacing theatrically. I think you're here to pitch something. A skincare line, maybe. Or a mindfulness app. That's what your type does, right? Sell inspiration to people who can't afford the real thing. The laughter erupted again, crueler than ever. But it wasn't unanimous. This time some faces remained still. Some eyes flicked nervously toward Naomi, then back to Brandon. Doubt was creeping in. Naomi's fingernail clicked against her phone screen once more. A deliberate sound. Elias's message flashed again, glowing faintly. Omega Protocol. Standing by. The weight of power sat quietly in her palm. He leaned closer now, his breath laced with expensive bourbon. Answer me, sweetheart. Who are you with? Who brought you? Or do we need to call security to escort you back to enough? The word was not shouted. It did not need to be. It rolled through the room like thunder, low and heavy, and for the first time Brandon's grin faltered. Richard's pulse quickened. He had heard that tone before, not from Naomi specifically, but from people who carried real power, not inherited power, not cosmetic influence, but structural power, the kind that could shift markets with a single decision. His stomach turned. He remembered now where he had seen her name. The Singapore logistics deal. The biotech IPO. The whispers in Washington about an invisible architect reshaping the capital landscape. And here she was, standing in his employer's ballroom, treated like an interloper. His mouth went dry. Maya's voice broke through the tension. "Do you even know who she is?" she demanded, louder than she expected. The room went still, heads turned. Brandon blinked at her irritation flashing across his face. "She's not a guest," Maya said, her voice shaking, but growing stronger. She held up her tablet, the words glowing on the screen. "She's a board-level investor." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones lit up instantly, fingers tapping furiously. Names were searched. Images surfaced. And with each search, with each revelation, the balance of the room shifted. Forbes covers. Davos keynotes. A TED Talk viewed millions of times. Naomi Carter's face illuminated screens across the ballroom, glowing like a rising sun. The silence that followed was heavier than any laughter that had come before. Brandon's grin collapsed into something brittle, desperate. "That's fake," he snapped. "Anyone can Photoshop a profile. She's nobody." But his voice no longer rang with confidence. It rang with fear. Naomi lifted her eyes from the city skyline and looked directly at Brandon. Her voice was calm, even, absolute. "You've mistaken silence for absence," she said, "and respect for weakness. But here's the truth, Brandon." She stepped forward, the click of her heels echoing through the marble like a gavel. "You don't own this room." Her phone buzzed once in her hand. Elias's final message appeared. All systems primed, awaiting single-word confirmation. Naomi's gaze did not leave Brandon's. "This room," she said, her voice cutting like glass, "was built with my capital." The crowd erupted, not in laughter this time, but in shock. And Brandon, for the first time in his life, found himself speechless. The words landed with surgical precision. "Is there a dress code here I've misunderstood? Or just a face code?" The air inside the Empire Sky Club thickened. It was no longer laughter that circled the room, but something sharper, unease. A current of discomfort rippled across the marble floor, through the glittering gowns and bespoke suits, through every guest who had been trained since birth to recognize when a line had been crossed. Brandon Whitmore Jr. blinked, momentarily stunned. He had expected stammering. He had expected the flush of embarrassment. Instead, Naomi Carter had given him a blade disguised as a question. And worse, she had delivered it calmly. For a fraction of a second, Brandon faltered. But weakness was something he could never afford to show, not here, not in front of the Empire his last name was supposed to command. He laughed. Too loudly. "Oh, I see. She's got a sense of humor. Well, sweetheart, that's cute. But this isn't open mic night. This is a closed event. And you," he gestured toward her with his champagne glass liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim, "are out of your depth." The crowd chuckled, brittle and uncertain. Their laughter was not loyalty. It was insurance, the reflexive instinct of those who knew that even a cruel man's power was still power, and aligning with it was safer than opposing it. Richard Hale stood a few paces behind Brandon, his posture immaculate, his tailored suit precise to the millimeter. To the untrained eye, he was merely the loyal consigliere, a shadow that reinforced his employer's authority. But Richard's mind was racing. The name Carter gnawed at him. He had seen it before, buried in board minutes, hidden in the footnotes of international contracts, and yet Brandon treated her as though she were a trespasser. Richard's gaze flicked to the phone in Naomi's hand. Her thumb rested with unsettling composure over the screen, as if one tap could change the trajectory of the evening. Perhaps it could. Naomi did not dignify Brandon's jab with an answer. Instead, she turned her head slightly, her eyes catching the city skyline beyond the glass. To most, it looked like indifference. To those who looked closer, it was calculation. Her silence was not surrender, it was leverage. In a room filled with voices, desperate to dominate, silence could be the loudest sound. On the far edge of the ballroom, Maya Lopez's fingers trembled as she scrolled through her encrypted tablet. The young analyst could hardly breathe. There it was, glowing in official font stamped with the seal of Whitmore Realty Nexus Capital Partners. Lead financier, Representative Naomi Carter. Managing Director, her chest tightened. She looked up at Naomi, this woman standing alone, poised, unyielding, and saw her not as an intruder, but as the invisible hand holding up the very foundation of the Whitmore Empire. The realization was terrifying. Maya wanted to shout it out to correct the narrative unfolding in front of her, but her voice was a fragile thing in this cathedral of money. And Brandon's sneer was the kind that had crushed stronger people than her. Still, the truth burned in her throat, demanding release. From the bar, a venture capitalist in his 50s leaned toward his companion. She's bold, I'll give her that. But Brandon will crush her? His friend smirked. Of course he will. Do you see what she's wearing? That's not armor. That's ordinary. Their words dripped with the lazy arrogance of men who had never been underestimated in their lives. Naomi heard them. She filed them away. Tell you what, Brandon said, setting his glass down with a flourish. Since you've interrupted our evening, why don't you introduce yourself? Let's see if we can all guess which nonprofit sent you to tug on our heartstrings. Or maybe you're writing a screenplay about the rich and powerful. This could be great research. The laughter was sharper this time, the edges of cruelty more pronounced. Naomi's eyes shifted slowly to Brandon, and for the first time the faintest curve of a smile touched her lips. Not warmth, not amusement. Something colder. It was the kind of smile that belongs to a chess master who knows the game has already been won, even if the opponent hasn't realized it yet. Richard Hale felt it. The room was laughing, yes, but the laughter no longer rang true. It was brittle, defensive. Too many were looking at their phones now, too many were whispering, too many were searching for context. He adjusted his cufflinks, his mind racing back through contracts, through the names that had crossed his desk. Carter, Nexus. Something about this was profoundly wrong. In that moment, Naomi remembered another ballroom 15 years ago in Palo Alto. She had stood in front of men who praised her intelligence while simultaneously denying her capital. They had laughed then too, smiled warmly while explaining why she was not the right fit. But she had walked out of that room with fire in her veins, with a vow etched into her bones. The next time I stand in a room like this, I will not be asking for a seat at the table. I will own the table. Tonight she was delivering on that vow. Maya's heart hammered in her chest. She could not stay silent. Taking a tentative step forward, she clutched her tablet tighter, the glow of Naomi's name still burning on the screen. She opened her mouth and froze because Brandon's voice thundered again, louder than before. You know what I think, Brandon said, pacing theatrically? I think you're here to pitch something. A skincare line, maybe? Or a mindfulness app? That's what your type does, right? Sell inspiration to people who can't afford the real thing. The laughter erupted again, crueler than ever. But it wasn't unanimous. This time, some faces remained still, some eyes flicked nervously toward Naomi, then back to Brandon. Doubt was creeping in. Naomi's fingernail clicked against her phone screen once more. A deliberate sound. Elias's message flashed again, glowing faintly, Omega Protocol. Standing by. The weight of power sat quietly in her palm. He leaned closer now, his breath laced with expensive bourbon. Answer me, sweetheart. Who are you with? Who brought you? Or do we need to call security to escort you back to enough? The word was not shouted. It did not need to be. It rolled through the room like thunder, low and heavy, and for the first time, Brandon's grin faltered. Richard's pulse quickened. He had heard that tone before, not from Naomi specifically, but from people who carried real power. Not inherited power, not cosmetic influence, but structural power. The kind that could shift markets with a single decision. His stomach turned. He remembered now where he had seen her name. The Singapore logistics deal, the biotech IPO. The whispers in Washington about an invisible architect reshaping the capital landscape. And here she was, standing in his employer's ballroom, treated like an interloper. His mouth went dry. Maya's voice broke through the tension. Do you even know who she is? She demanded louder than she expected. The room went still, heads turned. Brandon blinked at her irritation flashing across his face. She's not a guest? Maya said, her voice shaking, but growing stronger. She held up her tablet, the words glowing on the screen. She's a board-level investor. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones lit up instantly, fingers tapping furiously. Names were searched. Images surfaced. And with each search, with each revelation, the balance of the room shifted. Forbes covers. Davos keynotes. A TED Talk viewed millions of times. Naomi Carter's face illuminated screens across the ballroom, glowing like a rising sun. The silence that followed was heavier than any laughter that had come before. Brandon's grin collapsed into something brittle, desperate. That's fake, he snapped. Anyone can Photoshop a profile. She's nobody. But his voice no longer rang with confidence. It rang with fear. Naomi lifted her eyes from the city skyline and looked directly at Brandon. Her voice was calm. Even. Absolute. You've mistaken silence for absence, she said, and respect for weakness. But here's the truth, Brandon. She stepped forward, the click of her heels echoing through the marble like a gavel. You don't own this room. Her phone buzzed once in her hand. Elias's final message appeared. All systems primed. Awaiting single-word confirmation. Naomi's gaze did not leave Brandon's. This room, she said, her voice cutting like glass, was built with my capital. The crowd erupted not in laughter this time, but in shock. And Brandon, for the first time in his life, found himself speechless. The words detonated in the heart of the Empire Sky Club like a controlled explosion. This room was built with my capital. For a heartbeat, there was no reaction, no gasp, no murmur. Just the sound of air itself struggling to understand what had been spoken. Then the fissures began. Phones glowed in trembling hands. Conversations dropped into stunned silence. A hedge fund titan nearly spilled his 25-year-old whiskey as he stared at the search results now flooding his screen. And Brandon Whitmore Jr., heir, showman, tormentor, felt something he had never once felt in this room, uncertainty. He tried to laugh. It was a brittle sound cracking under its own weight. Cute. Very cute. You walk in off the street, you make a bold claim, and suddenly you think you're the Queen of Manhattan. But no one laughed with him this time. The echo of his mockery fell flat like coins tossed into a well with no water. Brandon's jaw tightened. He looked around at the crowd, his crowd searching for the reflexive smiles, the nods of approval, the protective cocoon of complicity that had always surrounded him. But the crowd was shifting. Eyes were turning toward Naomi, not him. Fingers tapped furiously at glass screens, pulling up evidence he couldn't deny. Forbes covers. NASDAQ bell ceremonies, global economic summits. The room was learning the truth faster than he could bury it. Richard Hale's pulse hammered in his temples. He remembered now. He remembered the clause buried in the 2008 bailout, the shadow signature on the real estate recovery fund. Naomi Carter, the woman Brandon had humiliated in front of New York's most powerful elite, was not an interloper. She was their silent guardian, and possibly their executioner. Richard's mind scrambled for strategy. If Naomi chose to pull her capital, the Whitmore empire could fracture overnight. Brandon's father, Alistair, wasn't here. Richard was. That meant the burden of containment was his. But how do you contain a storm when the storm has decided to reveal itself? Naomi did not bask in the shock. She did not gloat. She simply stood still and unyielding, as if the room's unraveling was merely the natural order of things. Her silence forced others to fill it, and in that silence, power redefined itself. Maya Lopez, the junior analyst, felt adrenaline surge through her veins. She had spoken once timidly, but the truth on her screen demanded more. "She's not just a guest," Maya said, her voice stronger now. "She underwrites the Phoenix Whitmore joint venture. She controls the capital that funds half this room." Her words cracked like lightning. Dozens of heads swiveled. Brandon's face darkened. "Sit down." He snapped, his voice dripping with disdain. "You don't belong in this conversation. You're an intern, for God's sake." Maya swallowed hard, but she did not step back. Her tablet still glowed, Naomi's name blazing like fire on the screen. Naomi's eyes flicked toward her just briefly, a flicker of acknowledgement. It was enough. Maya felt something shift inside her, courage, solidifying into conviction. A man in a gray blazer, his face already flushed from too much champagne, laughed harshly. "This is absurd. If she were really who she claims to be, we'd all know it. Alistair would have introduced her himself. There's no way. Do you know everything Alistair tells you?" Naomi's voice cut across his protest like a scalpel. The man froze, mouth hanging open. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "No." "Then perhaps you should stop assuming your ignorance is proof." A ripple of discomfort spread. The man lowered his gaze, suddenly fascinated by the bubbles in his champagne flute. Brandon straightened, rallying his bravado. "Fine," he said. "You want to play queen of the room? Then prove it. Show us your credentials. Show us your badge, your title, your invitation. Let's see if you're really on the list." He gestured toward the check-in desk near the back, where staff huddled nervously, clearly unsure of whether to intervene. Naomi's eyes lingered on him for a moment, then swept across the room. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but absolute. "I don't carry credentials to rooms I own." A collective gasp. The words struck like thunder, rattling the chandelier crystals above their heads. Richard stepped forward, his voice low, his tone edged with calculated diplomacy. "Ms. Carter," he began carefully, "if what you say is true, then surely we can settle this matter discreetly. There's no need for dramatics. We can verify your stake in the venture quietly in the boardroom with the proper—" Naomi turned her head toward him, her gaze cool, unwavering. "Discretion is for those who fear exposure," she said. "I do not." Richard stopped. For the first time in years, he felt the sharp edge of impotence. Naomi's phone vibrated once. A single message from Elias Morgan pulsed across the screen. Omega Protocol. Primed. Awaiting confirmation. Her thumb hovered over the glass, but she did not press. Not yet. Timing was everything. The room wasn't ready to collapse. Not yet. It needed to understand what was being dismantled. Brandon laughed loudly, his voice cracking. "This is pathetic. Look at her, tapping her phone like she's hacking into our systems. Maybe she's texting her boss to ask what private equity means." A ripple of forced laughter sputtered across the room. but it was thinner this time, less sure. Naomi's gaze settled on him, her expression unchanging. "Keep speaking," she said softly. "Every word you add becomes evidence." At the edge of the room, a senator's wife leaned toward her husband, whispering urgently, "If she's telling the truth, this changes everything. Our pack money, the real estate portfolio." Her husband hushed her, but his eyes flicked nervously toward Naomi. Around the ballroom, alliances began to wobble, shoulders hunched, phones buzzed with frantic texts to absent partners. For the first time, Brandon was no longer the center of gravity. Naomi was. She tapped her phone once more deliberately. The sound echoed louder than the jazz trio in the corner, and then she spoke, her tone calm but imbued with finality. "Your empire survives because I chose for it to. That choice can change." The silence that followed was suffocating. "You're bluffing!" Brandon shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his fear. "If you really had that kind of power, you wouldn't be standing here begging for attention." Naomi's eyes glinted. "I am not begging," she said. "I am warning." Maya stepped forward again, trembling but resolute. "She's telling the truth," she said louder this time. "I've verified it. She holds controlling leverage over Phoenix Whitmore. Every asset you claim as yours exists because she allows it." Her words, amplified by courage, pierced the room, and Brandon, cornered, turned on her like a predator desperate for a weaker prey. "Shut your mouth," he snarled. "You're an intern. You're nothing." But Maya did not back down. She looked at Naomi, and Naomi's slight nod gave her the strength to continue. Naomi stepped forward, her presence commanding, her voice resonant. "You say she's nothing because that is how your world survives, by dismissing those you do not understand. But the truth is, this power does not announce itself with a last name or a logo. It does not swagger. It does not beg. Power simply decides when you are allowed to see it." The chandeliers seemed to hum in agreement. Richard exhaled slowly, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. He realized now that the evening was lost. Naomi had chosen this room, this night, this audience. And she wasn't bluffing. She was orchestrating. And Brandon had walked straight into her trap. Naomi lifted her phone, her thumb resting gently on the glass. She did not press. Her eyes swept across the room, across every face that had laughed, every smirk that had dismissed her. "Shall I prove it?" she asked softly. The room held its breath. And Brandon, pale now, shouted the only word left in his arsenal: "Do it." Naomi's lips curved faintly. "As you wish." Her thumb pressed down, and the first tremors began. The moment Naomi's thumb pressed the screen, the world inside the Empire Sky Club shifted. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with silence. An almost imperceptible hum rippled through the phones, tablets, and laptops scattered across the room. Screens flickered, refreshed, and then froze. Some went black altogether. Others bled error messages in sterile white font across digital blue. The collapse didn't announce itself with fireworks. It announced itself with absence. Absence of access. Absence of control. Absence of the invisible systems these people had always assumed would obey them. It began at the bar. A mid-tier investor pulled out his phone intending to check a market alert. The screen flashed red. Access denied. "What the hell?" he muttered, refreshing. Nothing. Across the room, a senior partner from a venture capital firm stared down at his tablet, his face paling. "Our dashboard just crashed," he whispered to no one in particular. "Server unavailable." The murmurs spread like static electricity, traveling through clusters of guests faster than champagne could pour. Heads bent over devices, frowns deepened, voices sharpened. And in the eye of the storm stood Naomi Carter, still, silent, sovereign. Brandon Whitmore Jr. barked a laugh, too loud, too brittle. "Glitches, that's all this is. A Wi-Fi hiccup. Don't panic over nothing. But his words carried no conviction, because even as he spoke, his own phone vibrated violently in his pocket. He yanked it out, glared at the glowing screen. A single notification repeated itself like a hammer: unauthorized access. Credentials revoked. Brandon's grin cracked. Richard Hale's instincts screamed at him. He strode to the corner where a staff liaison clutched a secure tablet, panic written across her face. "Report," Richard demanded. She shook her head, eyes wide. "Sir, it's not the Wi-Fi, it's the servers. Every internal Whitmore portal is dark. Real estate valuations, investor comms, even the CRM system, we've lost everything." Richard's throat went dry. He turned slowly, his eyes finding Naomi across the room. And then he understood. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words carried across the marble with the weight of inevitability. "What you are experiencing," she said evenly, "isn't a glitch. It is the reminder that control was never yours to begin with." The room erupted in gasps, whispers, frantic tapping of screens. Naomi took one slow step forward. "You assumed my silence meant irrelevance. You assumed my absence meant weakness. But I do not need to be visible to be in control. I need only decide when to let you see the truth." Her voice lingered in the air like a decree. Maya Lopez stood at the center of it, her tablet still glowing with Naomi's name. Her own voice trembled, but she forced it into steadiness. "She warned you," Maya said louder now. "She told you this room existed because of her. And you laughed. You dismissed her. You pretended she was nothing. And now," she gestured toward the darkened devices around the ballroom, "now you see." The courage in her tone struck deeper than any error message could. "This is fraud!" Brandon shouted, his voice cracking. "This is sabotage! Security, get her out of here right now!" Two guards hovered uncertainly by the door, their faces pale. They did not move. Brandon turned on them, fury blazing. "What are you waiting for? Remove her!" But the guards shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flicking toward Naomi, then to the dead screens in their hands. They had been trained to read power. Tonight the cues had changed. Richard stepped in, voice strained with forced diplomacy. "Naomi, Miss Carter, surely we can resolve this." A conversation, a negotiation? "This display is unnecessary. You'll destabilize the market." Naomi turned her gaze on him, steady and merciless. "The market has never cared about me," she said, "yet it has lived off my capital for years. If destabilization is the cost of truth, so be it." Richard fell silent. There was no counter-argument. From the crowd, whispers surged louder. "She's serious. She just froze billions. My firm's account is locked. This can't be happening." Panic brewed. For the first time, the room, full of titans and heirs, looked less like gods and more like frightened children clutching devices that no longer obeyed. Naomi lifted her phone once more. A new message glowed from Elias Morgan Omega, Phase 1 complete. "Shall I proceed with Phase 2? She looked directly at Brandon. "You wanted proof. Here it is. Your empire runs on my systems, my funding, my authorization. And with a single word, it ends." Brandon's face drained of color. His hand trembled as he clutched his useless phone. "You can't," he whispered. "You wouldn't." Naomi's lips curved faintly. "You think power hesitates? Watch closely." She whispered into the phone. One word. Proceed. The ballroom trembled, not physically, but digitally. Screens across the room updated at once. Error codes transformed into formal notifications. Whitmore Realty asset lock initiated. Phoenix Whitmore venture capital flow suspended. All Q4 campaigns paused pending review. The air filled with the sound of disbelief groans, curses, the frantic tapping of fingers against unresponsive glass. And still Naomi stood calm. Brandon staggered forward, his face contorted. "You can't do this. This is my father's company. This is our name, our legacy." Naomi tilted her head, her expression almost pitying. "No, Brandon. This is my capital. Your father's empire survived because I allowed it. And tonight that allowance is revoked." The words cut deeper than any blade. Brandon stumbled back, his confidence crumbling. From the back, a woman in a crimson gown, a media executive known for her ruthless instincts, clapped once sharply. "She's not bluffing," the woman said. "She owns this room. Not you." Her words broke the dam. Conversations surged, alliances dissolved. The crowd reoriented itself not around the heir of Whitmore, but around the woman who had just dismantled him. Naomi Carter had become the gravitational center of the night. Richard approached cautiously, lowering his voice. "Naomi, if you end the venture tonight, the collapse will be catastrophic. Thousands of employees, entire neighborhoods." Naomi's gaze flicked to him, unflinching. "You speak as if I haven't considered the consequences. Do not mistake precision for recklessness. I have prepared for this moment longer than you can imagine." Richard faltered. He realized she wasn't bluffing. She was executing a plan written years ago. Maya felt her spine straighten, her fear dissolving. She looked at Naomi not with worship, but with understanding. This wasn't just revenge, it was reclamation. A rewriting of rules that had kept women like her like them on the margins. Maya lifted her chin and spoke, her voice carrying across the room. "You asked who she was," Maya said, her tone fierce. "She's Naomi Carter, managing director of Nexus Capital, and tonight she reminded you that respect is not given, it's enforced." Her words hung in the air, igniting murmurs of agreement, of awe. Brandon roared, his voice cracking under hysteria. "This isn't over. My father will—" Naomi cut him off, her voice soft but sharper than steel. "Your father already knows, because every system he relies on just notified him that I have pulled $7.2 billion from your venture. He will not save you. He will beg me." Brandon's breath caught. The room reeled. The chandeliers glittered above the skyline of New York, stretched endlessly beyond the glass. And Naomi Carter stood at the center, immovable. "You thought tonight was yours," she said. "But history will remember it as mine. Not because I shouted, not because I demanded, but because I decided it was time you finally saw who built your throne." The room fell silent, every heartbeat synchronized to her words. And in that silence, the Whitmore Empire began to crumble. The ballroom of the Empire Sky Club had always been a fortress, a place where secrets were bartered, deals were whispered, reputations were protected by marble and glass and money. But tonight its walls were paper. And Naomi Carter had lit a match. Brandon Whitmore Jr. was unraveling. Sweat beaded his forehead, despite the chill of the air conditioning. His shirt collar gaped open, his tie askew. He was a man unaccustomed to silence, especially silence that wasn't admiration. "This is madness." He barked, his voice cracking. "Nobody in this room believes her. She's manipulating all of you. She's some hacker. That's all a parasite." But his words echoed hollowly. Too many people in the room had already seen Naomi's name on their screens, already recognized her from Forbes covers and televised summits. And worse, too many people were now broadcasting what they saw. At the edge of the crowd, a young journalist had lifted his phone again. This time he did not lower it. The red recording light blinked steadily, defiantly. The fortress was leaking. Richard Hale knew it was over long before Brandon did. He had spent decades studying the subtleties of power, how it moved, how it cloaked itself, how it shifted silently, until only those paying attention realized the landscape had changed. Tonight, Naomi had revealed herself not as a disruptor, but as the architect. Richard adjusted his cufflinks with mechanical precision, though his pulse hammered at his throat. He leaned toward Brandon, his voice sharp but hushed. "Stop talking." Brandon spun on him, wild-eyed. "Are you insane? We can't let her control this room." Richard's jaw tightened. "She already does." The words landed like a death knell. Naomi Carter took a single step toward the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted instinctively, as though gravity itself had shifted. She did not need the microphone perched by the bandstand. Her voice carried with measured precision a tone that sliced through panic and disbelief with calm authority. "My name," she said, "is Naomi Carter, Managing Director of Nexus Capital Partners. For 5 years, I have been the silent investor keeping Whitmore Realty alive." Her words were not shouted, but they detonated nonetheless. A gasp surged through the room. A woman at the bar dropped her glass crystal, shattering across the marble. Naomi continued steady and relentless. "Tonight that silence ends." The first live stream hit Twitter within seconds. Breaking: Naomi Carter hijacks Whitmore Gala, claims control of Phoenix Whitmore Venture. Another followed on Instagram, #NexusNuke, scrawled in bold letters over Naomi's poised face. By the time the words left her mouth, the world outside the skyscraper already knew. The fortress had crumbled into a stage. "No," Brandon roared, lunging forward. His champagne glass toppled from his hand, pale liquid splattering onto the marble like wasted gold. "You're lying." His voice was ragged, almost childlike. "You forged documents. You—" Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't even look at him. "Every document is verified," she said calmly. "Every dollar accounted for. Every clause signed by your father's hand. Denial will not save you." Brandon froze, the words lodging in his throat. For the first time in his life, he had no script. Maya Lopez's heart thundered in her chest, but adrenaline burned away her fear. She stepped closer, lifting her tablet high. "She's telling the truth," Maya declared. Her voice shook, then steadied. "I've verified the records myself. She's the lead financier. She holds the controlling stake. Without her, this venture doesn't exist." Eyes swiveled toward her, the young analyst standing against titans. Naomi's gaze flicked briefly to Maya, acknowledgement silent but powerful. Maya felt it like a current running through her veins. The ballroom fractured. Some guests clung desperately to Brandon, muttering about loyalty, legacy, the Whitmore name. But more shifted toward Naomi, their whispers trembling with awe, with fear, with reluctant respect. "She really controls billions. I saw her in Davos. Do you know what this means for the market?" Each murmur eroded Brandon's position, until he was no longer the host of the night, but the desperate heir clinging to the wreckage of his father's empire. Richard, ever the strategist, stepped forward. His voice was smooth, diplomatic, almost pleading. "Ms. Carter," he said, "if you have grievances, we can address them. The board can convene. This public display." Naomi's eyes cut to him, cool and unyielding. "This is not a grievance," she said. "This is a reckoning." Richard's composure faltered. He felt the ground shift beneath him, and for the first time in his career, he realized he was not a player tonight. He was a pawn. Naomi turned to the room, her gaze sweeping across faces pale with fear and glittering with diamonds. "For years," she said, "you have sat in rooms like this and mistaken inheritance for intelligence. You have mistaken arrogance for leadership. You have mistaken silence for irrelevance." Her voice rose, not loud, but deep, resonant. "Let me correct you." A hush fell so complete that even the city beyond the glass seemed to pause. "Silence," Naomi said, "is not weakness. It is strategy. It is power waiting for its moment. And tonight, that moment is mine." The words slammed into the room like a verdict. Phones were no longer hidden. They were raised high, capturing every syllable. Naomi's face flooded timelines in real time, her calm composure radiating through a million screens. CNBC anchors broke into programming. Twitter trended with #Naomi Carter within minutes. The fortress had not only fallen, it had become a broadcast tower. "You can't do this!" Brandon's voice cracked, desperation tearing through the last of his bravado. My father will crush you. He'll sue you into nothing. Naomi turned her eyes on him, at last steady, surgical. Your father already knows, she said, because I made sure his phone was the first to receive the notification. He will not sue me. He will beg me. And you will learn the difference between power you inherit and power you earn. Brandon stumbled back, pale, trembling. It started with one woman, the media executive in crimson, her clap slow, deliberate. Then another joined. Then another. Until the ballroom, once complicit in cruelty, filled with applause. Not joyous applause, not celebratory, but acknowledgement, respect, the sound of an old order breaking. Naomi did not bow. She did not smile. She stood still, letting the sound wash over her like inevitability. Maya's hands trembled, but she clapped too, her eyes shining with something she had never felt in a ballroom like this: belonging. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't an intern to be dismissed. She was part of a moment that was rewriting history. Naomi's gaze found her again, and in that glance was a promise. This is your future too. Richard exhaled long and slow. The applause was a verdict he could not overturn. He bowed his head slightly, not in submission but in recognition. The board would panic. The markets would quake. But in this room at this hour, Naomi Carter had claimed sovereignty, and there was nothing left to do but witness it. When the applause ebbed into silence, Naomi spoke again. I did not come here to be seen, she said. I came here to decide. Tonight, I decided that silence is no longer useful. Tonight, I reminded you that respect is not negotiable. Her eyes swept the room one last time. And tomorrow, the world will remember who truly owns this city's future. She turned calm, unhurried, and walked toward the grand glass doors. The cameras followed. The applause lingered. And Brandon Whitmore, Jr. sank to his knees on the marble floor, his empire collapsing around him. The ballroom applause still echoed in memory long after Naomi Carter stepped into the cool Manhattan night. Inside, silence devoured what remained of the Whitmore legacy. Outside, the city hummed with the ordinary chaos of yellow cabs, late-night laughter, and glowing billboards. But beneath that hum, a deeper current stirred. The empire had shifted, and the world was already reacting. High above the city in Whitmore Realty's corporate tower, a war room had been convened. Alistair Whitmore's voice thundered from a secure conference line patched into the mahogany boardroom. His face projected across a wall-sized screen was a portrait of fury, sharp cheekbones carved by rage eyes, bloodshot from lack of sleep. Explain, Alistair barked. Now. Richard Hale stood at the head of the long table, his usually perfect composure faltering. Brandon slouched beside him, pale and trembling, his tie hanging loose like a noose. Richard spoke carefully. She executed Omega Protocol, sir. Locked every internal system. Froze capital flows. Announced herself as the controlling investor. Alistair's fist slammed against his desk miles away, the sound reverberating through the speakers. I trusted you to control that room. Richard swallowed. No one could have controlled her. She planned this for years. She humiliated us, Alistair spat. In front of the press, in front of the entire damn market. Our name is plastered across headlines with hers. Naomi Carter dismantles Whitmore dynasty. Do you have any idea what that means for Monday's Open? The room sat in suffocating silence. Brandon finally snapped, his voice shrill. It's all lies. She hacked us, forged documents, Dad. You can't believe silence. Alistair's command cut sharper than a blade. You did this, he snarled. You brought her attention down on us. You turned our fortress into a spectacle. Brandon's mouth opened, closed. No defense would come. Richard glanced at him with something between contempt and pity. Sir Richard said carefully, lawsuits will not work. She anticipated them. The contracts are airtight. If we push the board, we'll side with her. Alistair's eyes narrowed. Then what do you suggest? Richard inhaled. This was the gamble of his career. We don't fight her in court, he said. We fight her in the market. Leverage our political allies. Rally rival investors. Isolate Nexus Capital until she can't move without resistance. Alistair's glare softened into thought. Containment, he murmured. But deep down, Richard knew the truth. Naomi Carter was not a woman who could be contained. Across the city, Naomi sat in the quiet of her penthouse overlooking the Hudson. The space was minimalist, sleek steel and glass softened by warm wood, a single abstract painting dominating the wall. Floor-to-ceiling windows spilled light across her face, catching the calm determination etched into every line. On the table before her, a secure laptop pulsed with encrypted feeds. Elias Morgan's voice crackled in her earpiece. Phase 2 is holding steady, Elias reported. All Whitmore dashboards remain locked. Their board has initiated emergency protocols, but we have visibility into every move. Naomi's lips curved faintly. And the market's already reacting. Futures are volatile. Analysts are calling it a corporate coup. Naomi Carter is trending globally. Naomi exhaled slowly. This was not triumph. It was inevitability. She rose, walking to the window. The Hudson shimmered beneath her dark water, reflecting city lights like fragments of broken crowns. She thought of the years she had been invisible. The rooms where men had patted her shoulder and called her articulate. The contracts where her name had been buried in the fine print, unseen by those who thought visibility equaled importance. Tonight that era had ended. And yet she felt no glee, no vindictive satisfaction, only clarity. Power doesn't celebrate, she murmured. It recalibrates. Meanwhile, Maya Lopez sat in her modest apartment in Queens, her tablet still glowing with news alerts. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through her own face captured in live streams, standing beside Naomi Carter, her voice echoing Naomi's truth. Intern confronts billionaire's heir. Analyst confirms Carter's power. She could hardly breathe. In a single night, she had gone from invisible to unavoidable. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, Nexus Operations. Ms. Carter requests a meeting. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Location disclosed upon arrival. Maya stared at the screen, heart pounding. She knew she should be terrified. She knew this was dangerous. But she also knew she would go. By dawn, financial networks blazed with the story. Is Naomi Carter the most powerful woman on Wall Street? Asked CNBC. Silent investor detonates Whitmore dynasty, declared the New York Times. Corporate coup or calculated correction, speculated the Financial Journal. Stock tickers bled red as Whitmore shares plunged in pre-market trading. Rival firms scrambled to analyze their exposure. Senators fielded calls from donors demanding answers. The shift was not just financial, it was cultural. A new name had entered the lexicon of power, and it did not belong to a Whitmore. At 6 a.m., Alistair Whitmore convened another emergency call. His voice was hoarse, now frayed by hours of rage. "We need leverage," he growled. "If she controls the capital, we control the narrative. Media, politics, we smear her before she cements herself." Richard's tone was careful. "That will backfire. Every network is already framing her as the architect. If we attack, we confirm our weakness." Alistair's jaw clenched. "Then find me another way. Because I refuse to let my empire end at the hands of a woman who thinks silence makes her untouchable." But deep inside, Alistair knew silence hadn't made Naomi untouchable. It had made her inevitable. Back in her penthouse, Naomi sat with Elias Morgan on a secure video link. His face, lit by the glow of monitors, was calm but sharp. "They're scrambling," Elias reported. "Richard is advising containment. Alistair wants war. Brandon is useless." Naomi nodded. "And the board divided. Half are terrified. Half are waiting to see which way the wind blows." Naomi's eyes glinted. "Then we show them the wind." Elias leaned closer. Phase 3. Naomi turned toward the city skyline, her reflection merging with its towers. Not yet. Let them sweat. Let them feel the silence before the storm. Maya sat at her small kitchen table, the invitation from Nexus glowing on her screen. She thought of her family, of the years she had clawed her way into internships where no one remembered her name. She thought of Naomi standing in that ballroom, calm, unshaken, rewriting history without raising her voice. For the first time in her life, Maya felt something deeper than fear. She felt belonging. She whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I go." By noon, Naomi's face dominated every major broadcast. Anchors dissected her words. Analysts debated her next move. Social media anointed her the silent architect. But Naomi did not watch. She sat alone in her penthouse sipping coffee, reading messages from Elias. Her power did not come from their recognition. It came from the knowledge that when she pressed a button, empires moved. Richard Hale sat in his office staring at the skyline. He had devoted his life to managing crises, to ensuring the Whitmore empire always emerged stronger. But this was not a crisis. It was an eclipse. He realized with chilling clarity, Brandon was finished. Alistair was cornered. And Naomi Carter was not just a rival, she was the future. That evening, Naomi stood once more at her window, the Hudson, dark and restless beneath her. Elias's voice returned through her earpiece. Markets are unstable. Whitmore stock down 15%. The board is calling for emergency negotiations. They want you at the table. Naomi's lips curved faintly. Good, she said. Because I'm not coming to their table. They're coming to mine. She pressed her phone, sending a single encrypted command. Phase 3, draft statement, global, release pending. The screen pulsed, and somewhere across Manhattan, alarms began to sound in Whitmore's servers. Morning light slid across Manhattan like a blade. The skyline glittered with false serenity, but beneath its glass towers, the city vibrated with rumor and fear. Naomi Carter had pressed a button, and the world had changed. At exactly 9:00 a.m., every major financial network interrupted its programming. CNBC anchors stopped mid-sentence. Bloomberg cut away from pre-market analysis. The feed flickered, then stabilized on Naomi Carter. She was seated in a minimalist studio, white walls, a single chair, a window behind her showing the sweep of the Hudson. No logos, no branding, only her. She wore the same midnight blue dress she had worn in the ballroom. Not because she lacked wardrobe, but because symbolism mattered. Her posture was poised, regal without being ostentatious. Her gaze direct, calm. She began without greeting. My name is Naomi Carter, and for 5 years, I have been the silent partner behind Whitmore Realty and its ventures. The words hit like steel striking stone. In that silence, I watched. I watched empires pretend they were invincible. I watched arrogance masquerade as legacy. I watched as entire rooms dismissed me not because I lacked power, but because I refused to shout. Her tone deepened, deliberate. Last night that silence ended, not because I needed recognition, but because power without accountability breeds rot. And it was time the rot was exposed. Living rooms, corner offices, and trading floors across the globe fell still. In Hong Kong, a hedge fund manager set his pen down. In Dubai, a sheikh paused his morning prayers to turn toward the screen. In a Detroit living room, a single mother whispered, "Finally." Naomi's voice carried not just across cities, but across lives. She leaned forward slightly, her words threading precision with fire. Let me be clear, I did not take Whitmore's empire. I built it. Quietly, methodically. When others fled, I invested. When others mocked, I strategized. And when others squandered, I preserved. Her eyes narrowed a rare flicker of steel. And yet, in their halls, I was treated as an intruder. Last night, their heirs sneered at me, mistaking inheritance for power. That mistake cost them $7.2 billion. The line ricocheted across headlines within seconds. In the Whitmore boardroom, Richard Hale sat with his jaw clenched, staring at the screen. The board members shifted uneasily, their whispers sharp and panicked. "She's controlling the narrative. She's too composed. This could destroy us." Richard's hand tightened around his pen until it nearly snapped. He understood what the others did not. Naomi wasn't controlling the narrative. She was the narrative. At the end of the table, Brandon muttered incoherently, "She's lying. She's stealing it all." But no one listened anymore. His voice had become irrelevant noise drowned beneath Naomi's clarity. Even his father, Alistair, who appeared grim-faced on a secure screen, did not defend him. On every television, Naomi's voice grew steadier, sharper. Last night was not just about one dynasty's arrogance. It was about every room that has shut its doors on women, on outsiders, on those who were never meant to belong. It was about every time silence was mistaken for weakness. She let the words breathe. "I am not here to play the victim. I am not here to beg for inclusion. I am here to remind you respect is not negotiable. Dignity is not optional. Power does not ask. It decides." She leaned back, her presence radiating control. "And I have decided." In her small Queens apartment, Maya Lopez sat on the edge of her bed, tears pricking her eyes. Naomi's words weren't just about billion-dollar contracts. They were about her. About every intern ignored, every analyst dismissed, every young woman told she wasn't ready. Maya clutched her tablet, whispering, "She said it for all of us." Her phone buzzed again. A second message. "Ms. Carter will see you today. Be ready." Maya exhaled, steadying herself. She wasn't just going to witness history, she was going to be part of it. The market convulsed. Whitmore Realty's stock bled red, dropping 18% by midday. Trading floors buzzed with frantic phone calls. Banks scrambled to calculate exposure. Meanwhile, Nexus Capital, Naomi's once shadowy firm, saw inquiries flood in. Emails, offers, partnerships. Everyone suddenly wanted to know the woman who had detonated an empire without raising her voice. In his private estate outside Boston, Alistair Whitmore paced like a caged animal. "She's turning this into a crusade," he hissed into the phone. "If we let her keep talking, we'll be buried under applause." On the other end, Richard's voice was calm but grim. "She already has the applause. The question is whether she decides to bury you." Alistair's face flushed. "Then we go to war." But even as he said it, he knew the battlefield no longer belonged to him. On the broadcast, Naomi's voice softened, but her words struck even deeper. "I do not stand here to tear down without purpose. I stand here to build. Nexus Capital will not only divest from Whitmore, we will reinvest into housing, into technology, into communities ignored by the very men who mocked me." The vision unfurled, clear, unstoppable. This is not about revenge. This is about rewriting the rules of the game. On Wall Street, traders paused to clap. In Brooklyn, a cafe erupted in cheers. On social media, hashtags surged. #Naomi Carter, #Nexus, rising cash, respect is power. It was no longer just a corporate shift. It was a cultural movement. At 3 p.m., a black sedan pulled up outside Maya's apartment. The driver rolled down the window. "Ms. Lopez, Ms. Carter is expecting you." Maya's pulse raced. She climbed inside her tablet, clutched tight, her thoughts spinning. She wasn't ready, and yet somehow she was. As the broadcast drew to its end, Naomi delivered her final words with measured calm. "To those who doubt me, doubt is fuel. To those who fear me, fear is wisdom. And to those who stand with me," she paused, her gaze piercing through the screen, "stand tall, because this is only the beginning." The feed cut. Silence followed. But it wasn't empty silence. It was electric, pregnant. A silence that meant the world had just shifted on its axis. In Boston, Alistair's fist slammed the table. "She thinks she's untouchable. She thinks a speech makes her a dynasty. Fine. If she wants a war of respect, we'll show her a war of survival. His eyes burned with fury. Set the meeting. I will face her myself. That night in her penthouse, Naomi watched the city pulse below. Her phone buzzed. Elias's voice came through calm as ever. The Whitmore board has requested an emergency summit, and Alistair himself will attend. Naomi's lips curved faintly. Good, she murmured, because it's time the old guard looked me in the eye. The boardroom atop Whitmore Tower had been designed to intimidate. Its ceilings soared carved from imported oak. Its windows framed the Manhattan skyline as though the city itself bowed to the Whitmore dynasty. At the far end, beneath a crest of the family's logo etched in glass, sat Alistair Whitmore. For decades, he had been the unchallenged monarch of this room. Tonight, his crown was cracked. The room filled with whispers and tension as board members trickled in. Richard Hale adjusted his tie. His face set in grim neutrality. Brandon slouched at his father's side, pale, his jaw tight, but useless. The door opened. Naomi Carter entered. She did not rush. Her steps were deliberate, each one echoing against marble floors with the rhythm of inevitability. She wore no jewelry, no ostentation, only a sleek black suit tailored with precision, her hair swept back like a blade. And beside her, quiet but steady, walked Maya Lopez. The youngest in the room, her presence was jarring. Board members blinked, frowning, whispering. Naomi had brought not another executive, not an attorney, but a young analyst, a message sharper than any contract. Alistair's voice cracked through the air gravel in authority. You humiliated my son. You gutted my company. And then you delivered your sermon to the world as if you were some savior. Do you expect me to bow? Naomi met his glare, unblinking. I don't expect you to bow, Mr. Whitmore. I expect you to listen. The board shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke to Alistair that way. No one. Alistair leaned back, forcing a smirk. You think freezing assets makes you a queen? Power is not in buttons. It's in blood, in legacy. Naomi's gaze sharpened. And yet here you are begging the woman you underestimated to sit in your house and save you from collapse. Richard cleared his throat. His tone measured. Perhaps we should speak in terms of solutions. The market is in chaos. Investors are demanding answers. A negotiated settlement. Could Naomi's hand lifted slightly. Silence fell. There will be no settlement, she said. Only recalibration. Her eyes swept the table. For years, this board profited off my capital while pretending I did not exist. That era ends tonight. Brandon slammed his hand against the table. You don't belong here. You never did. You're just some. Naomi turned her gaze on him. Calm, precise. Brandon, she said softly, the only reason you are still in this room is because I allowed your family name to linger. But even a name can be erased. Brandon froze. His father's glare silenced him before he could stammer another word. Maya's heart hammered in her chest, but Naomi's quiet nod emboldened her. She stepped forward, her voice shaking at first, then firming with resolve. She belongs here more than anyone, Maya said. I verified the contracts, the money, the signatures, the clauses, all of it. She doesn't just belong, she owns. Gasps rippled around the table. Some sneered at the audacity of a junior analyst speaking. Others fell silent, recognizing the truth in her voice. Naomi allowed a small smile, not for the board, but for Maya. Alistair leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You think you've won, Naomi? You've shaken the tree? Yes. But do you know what happens to people who challenge dynasties? They burn. The press will turn on you. Politicians will dig into your past. Rivals will circle like sharks. You are one woman. And we, Naomi interrupted, her tone a blade. You are relics. The word landed heavy, final. You mistake longevity for invulnerability. But legacies are not carved in marble. They are carved in relevance. and relevance is what you lost the moment you underestimated me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard studied Naomi. Every syllable was a scalpel dissecting the illusion of Whitmore supremacy. He realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't negotiation. It was succession. Naomi wasn't here to join their table. She was here to replace it. Finally, Naomi broke the silence. "I am not here to destroy without purpose. I am here to build. You have two choices." Her voice deep and steady as stone. "Choice one, resist me. Watch your empire crumble. Your shareholders revolt. Your board scatter to safer hands." Her gaze locked on Alistair. "Choice two, adapt. Accept that this dynasty now stands on my terms. Whitmore Realty becomes Phoenix Nexus Group. A joint rebranding. A restructuring. You retain a seat at the table, but not the head. That seat is mine." The words struck like a gavel. Brandon's voice cracked. Over my dead body, Alistair did not look at him. He stared only at Naomi, weighing her words with the intensity of a man who had built empires from ashes before. But this time he was not the builder. He was the relic. "You have until midnight," Naomi said, rising to her feet. "At 12:01, Phase 3 goes live. Not just divestiture, full liquidation. Every joint asset you cling to will be dismantled piece by piece in front of the world." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes cutting into Alistair's. "And when history writes this chapter, it will not say Naomi Carter toppled Whitmore Realty. It will say Alistair Whitmore clung to arrogance until Naomi Carter rewrote the rules." The room froze. No one breathed. No one moved. Naomi turned toward the door. Maya followed, her chin lifted high. At the threshold, Naomi paused, glancing back once. "Midnight," she said simply. And then she was gone. Brandon collapsed into his chair, muttering curses. Richard exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. The board erupted in arguments. "She'll ruin us. She'll save us. Alistair, what do we do?" Alistair sat still, his jaw set, his eyes cold. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and deadly. "She wants war. Then war is what she'll have." Back in her penthouse, Naomi stood at the window, watching the lights of Manhattan flicker like stars caught in a storm. Elias's voice echoed through her secure line. "Do you think they'll choose surrender?" Naomi's lips curved faintly. "No," she murmured. "They'll choose war." Her eyes hardened, filled with unshakable resolve. "And that is exactly what I want."